Welcome to our deep dive. This time we're tackling emotional intelligence using Daniel Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. This stuff is seriously fascinating.
It really flips the script on that old idea that IQ is the be-all and end-all of success.
It totally does. Goleman argues that emotional intelligence, or EI, as it's called, might actually be a better predictor of how we navigate this crazy thing called life.
I think about that New York City bus driver who managed to transform a whole bus of grumpy commuters into a bunch of happy campers simply by being ridiculously cheerful himself.
Right, it really shows how our emotions can be contagious. It makes you realize the potential we all have to create that kind of positive ripple effect.
Absolutely. Imagine if we all tapped into that power. In today's world, which can feel a bit, chaotic at times, self-restraint and compassion seem more crucial than ever, wouldn't you say?
For sure. It's like we need a global dose of emotional intelligence stat.
Yeah.
But to really get how powerful our emotions are, I think we got to dive into the science behind them.
I totally agree. It's fascinating because our emotions aren't just some abstract things floating around in our heads, right? They're deeply rooted in our biology.
Totally. Think about it. Love, tender feelings, sexual satisfaction.
Yeah.
These are all linked to that relaxation response in our bodies, the total opposite of that fight or flight feeling we get when we're scared or angry.
Exactly. And it goes even deeper than that. Even something as simple as raising our eyebrows in surprise is like an evolutionary advantage, widening our field of vision so we can take in more information when something unexpected happens.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. So
Yeah.
it's like every little emotional expression has this deep biological root that's helped us survive throughout history.
Exactly. And all that points to this idea that emotions have been crucial to our survival as a species. They've shaped the way we interact with each other and how we've developed our sense of morality.
It's mind-blowing when you think about it like that. And speaking of the importance of emotions, Goleman shares this incredible story about Elliot, a successful lawyer who underwent brain surgery to remove a tumor.
Right. It's a case that's really stuck with me. It just shows how crucial emotions are for us to make decisions. After the surgery, Elliot's intellect was completely fine, but he lost the ability to feel emotions.
And it's like his life just completely fell apart. He lost his job, his marriage ended, he was financially ruined, and it's all because he couldn't understand or manage emotions, his own or anyone else's.
It's a stark reminder that our rational brain and our emotional brain need to work together if we want to truly thrive. Sometimes that emotional brain can basically hijack the whole system, which Goleman calls neural hijacking.
Yeah, neural hijacking. Kind of like that time I totally froze during a calculus exam in college. I knew the material inside and out, but the fear just took over and my brain basically shut down. Needless to say, I totally bombed that exam.
In those moments, our amygdala, the emotional part of our brain, it basically senses a threat and triggers that fight or flight response. Our heart rate goes up, we start sweating, and we can't think straight.
Which, makes sense if you're facing down a saber-toothed tiger, but not so much when you're trying to recall calculus formulas.
Exactly. In your case, the anxiety actually interfered with your ability to access the knowledge you already had. It became a self-fulfilling prophecy.
So how do we prevent our emotions from completely running the show? How do we make them work for us instead of against us?
Well, that's where Goleman's 5 domains of emotional intelligence come in. He talks about self-awareness, managing emotions, self-motivation, recognizing emotions in others, and handling relationships. And of those, I think empathy is the real game changer.
Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, that's got to be one of the most essential people skills out there, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It lets us connect with others on a deeper level and navigate social situations with more, sensitivity. And Goleman's research shows that empathy isn't just some fluffy, nice-to-have quality. It's literally wired into our brains. He even found evidence of empathy in rhesus monkeys, believe it or not.
Wait, seriously? Monkeys feeling each other's feelings? That's amazing. Tell me more.
So in this study, they trained monkeys to avoid an electric shock by pressing a lever when they heard a certain sound. Then they paired the monkeys up. Only one monkey in each pair could hear the sound and see the lever, while the other monkey could only see its partner's face on a monitor.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What happened next?
Well, when the first monkey heard the sound, it showed fear on its face. And get this, the second monkey, even though it couldn't hear the sound, would press its own lever as soon as it saw that fear on its partner's face.
That's incredible. So they were literally trying to protect each other, even though they weren't the ones in danger. It's like they were experiencing their partner's fear as if it were their own.
Exactly. And it suggests that empathy might be a much more fundamental part of our nature than we realize.
That's fascinating. But then, why do some people seem to have such a hard time with empathy? I mean, if we're all wired for it, shouldn't it be easier for everyone?
That's a great question. One factor Goleman points to is the idea of display rules. Think about it. We learn to express our emotions differently depending on the situation, right?
Yeah, like you wouldn't exactly burst into tears in the middle of a work presentation, even if you were feeling super overwhelmed.
Exactly. Different cultures have different display rules for how we show our emotions. And sometimes that can make it tricky to figure out what someone is really feeling.
Goleman has this example from the Vietnam War where an American platoon encountered a line of Buddhist monks walking calmly towards them during a firefight. And the soldiers were completely baffled. They were like, why aren't these monks terrified?
It turns out the monks had cultivated such a deep sense of inner peace through their spiritual practices that they were able to remain calm even in this incredibly dangerous situation. Their outward display of emotion didn't match what the soldiers expected.
That makes sense. And those kinds of misinterpretations happen in everyday life too, right? Goleman talks about how some kids have trouble picking up on social cues and they end up struggling in school.
Exactly. And it's not because they're not intelligent, it's because they're misreading social situations, which can lead to a lot of anxiety and confusion.
It's like they're missing a piece of the social puzzle. But then you have people like Terry, the social worker Goleman writes about. He used his emotional intelligence to diffuse a potentially volatile situation with a drunk man on a train.
Oh, I love that story. It's amazing what a little empathy can do.
So what did he do? Did he give the guy a lecture about the dangers of alcohol?
Not at all. He just sat down next to the man and listened to him. No judgment, no trying to fix his problems, just pure empathy.
And what happened? Did the guy get even angrier?
Nope. He actually calmed right down and started opening up to Terry about his struggles. By the time Terry got off the train, the man was sobbing in his lap, and the other passengers were in awe. It just shows how powerful empathy can be in resolving conflict.
So sometimes the best approach isn't about arguing or forcing your viewpoint on someone. Sometimes it's just about listening and trying to understand where they're coming from.
Couldn't agree more. And, that applies to our personal relationships as much as it does to our work lives. Goleman actually compares conflicts in a marriage to conflicts in the workplace. He says that in both cases, those emotionally charged criticisms and personal attacks just end up escalating the conflict and leading to defensiveness.
Oh, totally. It's like that classic scenario where a couple is arguing about whose turn it is to do the dishes.
Right. On the surface, it's about a chore, but underneath, there's a whole lot of unspoken resentment and hurt feelings fueling the fire.
Goleman talks about automatic thoughts, those unconscious beliefs we have about ourselves and others that often fuel our emotional reactions.
He uses the example of Melanie and Martin. We're having this big fight about the dishes. Melanie feels bullied by Martin's anger, while Martin feels constantly criticized by Melanie. And it's like their automatic thoughts are creating this cycle of negativity that's damaging their relationship.
And Goleman points out that this same dynamic plays out at work all the time. Like, a manager's harsh criticism can make employees feel resentful and defensive, which ultimately impacts productivity and morale.
Exactly. He even cites this study where they asked managers to recall times they'd kind of blown up at their employees. And the manager said that the employees usually just got defensive or shut down, which of course just made the managers more frustrated.
So what's the alternative? How do you give feedback without triggering that defensive reaction?
Well, Goleman suggests giving what he calls constructive feedback. It's specific, and it focuses on solutions rather than blame. So instead of saying, you're always late, you might say, when you were late to the meeting today, it meant we couldn't finalize the presentation, which puts us behind schedule.
So it's less about attacking someone's character and more about focusing on the impact of their behavior. Makes sense.
Right. And it's important to be present and sensitive to how your words are landing on the other person. Remember, our emotions don't just affect our relationships. They also have a huge impact on our physical health.
Oh yeah, the whole mind-body connection. Goleman talks about how chronic anger can be just as bad for us as smoking cigarettes.
Seriously. There's a clear link between anger and heart disease. And social isolation, that feeling of loneliness and being disconnected from others, is a major risk factor for all kinds of health problems.
It's crazy how much our emotions affect our physical well-being. But on the positive side, having emotional support can be incredibly healing.
Absolutely. Talking about our problems and sharing our feelings with people we trust can have a huge positive impact on our well-being. There's even research showing that writing about traumatic experiences can actually boost our immune function.
It's like expressing those pent-up emotions frees up our bodies to focus on healing. It's pretty amazing. But what about kids? How can we help them develop emotional intelligence so they don't have to learn these lessons the hard way?
That's such an important question. Goleman actually dedicates a whole chapter to that, highlighting how crucial those early childhood experiences are for shaping emotional development.
He mentions a pediatrician, T. Barry Brazelton, who uses this simple test to assess a baby's outlook on life. He gives the baby 2 blocks and shows her how to put them together.
And a baby who's feeling secure and confident will explore the blocks, dropping them and expecting her caregiver to pick them up.
But a baby who's more fearful or mistrustful might just cling to the caregiver or show little interest to the blocks.
It's a simple test, but it reveals a lot about a baby's developing sense of trust in the world. And Goleman's argument is that responsive parenting, where caregivers are attuned to a baby's needs and respond consistently, is key for fostering that sense of security and building resilience.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about kids who haven't had that kind of nurturing environment? What about kids who've experienced neglect or abuse?
That's a tough but essential question, and Goleman doesn't shy away from it. He talks about how emotional abuse and neglect can have a devastating impact on a child's emotional intelligence, especially their ability to empathize.
Yeah, he shares some heartbreaking examples of toddlers who've been abused exhibiting aggression and a lack of empathy. It's like they're mirroring the behavior they've been exposed to.
Exactly. It's as if they've learned that the world is a hostile place and that the only way to survive is to shut down their emotions and be tough.
And Goleman explains how trauma can actually leave a lasting imprint on the brain, leading to conditions like PTSD.
Which just highlights the importance of creating safe and supportive environments for children and getting them help early on if they're struggling.
So what can we do to help kids develop greater emotional intelligence? Are there specific things we can do at home or in schools?
There are definitely things we can do. Goleman talks about the growing trend of emotional education in schools. He believes that teaching kids about emotions, relationships, and social skills is just as important as teaching them academic subjects.
He highlights programs like self-science and the social competence program. What exactly are those all about?
Well, these programs are all about giving kids practical tools for navigating those inevitable ups and downs of life. They learn to recognize and manage their own emotions, understand other people's perspectives, resolve conflicts peacefully, and make responsible decisions.
It's like giving them a toolkit for emotional well-being. That's fantastic. So what are some examples of activities they use in these programs?
Goleman describes some really cool ones. There's this thing called the feelings cube, where kids roll a dice with different emotions on each side, and then they talk about what makes them feel that way.
I love that. It helps them put words to their feelings, which can be tough, especially for younger kids. What else?
There's also the mailbox activity, where kids can anonymously write down any problems they're having and drop them in a mailbox. Then the teacher reads the problems out loud, and the class brainstorms solutions together.
Oh, that's a great way to create a safe space for kids to share their struggles and support each other. It sounds like these programs are definitely a step in the right direction.
I think so too. It's all about equipping kids with the skills they need to thrive in a world that's becoming increasingly complex and, well, demanding.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into emotional intelligence. It's pretty clear that EI has this huge impact on almost every aspect of our lives, from our careers and relationships to our health and overall happiness. But let's get practical. What can we actually do to boost our own emotional intelligence? Give us some takeaways from this deep dive.
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
That's what Goleman really gets into in the second part of his book.
Perfect. I'm all ears because knowing about emotional intelligence is one thing, but actually putting it into practice, well, that's a whole other challenge.
Absolutely. You're spot on. It's like learning any new skill. It takes time, effort, and practice. But the good news is, emotional intelligence isn't fixed. It's a set of skills that we can develop and refine over time.
That's encouraging. So it's not like we're stuck with whatever level of EI we were born with. We can actually change and grow.
Exactly. Just like you can train your body to become stronger and more flexible, you can train your mind to become more emotionally intelligent.
So where do we even begin? What's the first step on this emotional intelligence journey?
Goleman is very clear on this. The foundation of emotional intelligence is self-awareness.
Right, being aware of our own emotions and how they influence our thoughts and actions.
Exactly. It might sound obvious, but you'd be surprised how many of us go through life on autopilot, reacting to situations without really tuning into what we're actually feeling.
Oh, I'm totally guilty of that, especially when it comes to those uncomfortable emotions. My tendency is just to shove them down and try to ignore them.
That's a really common coping mechanism. But Goleman argues that suppressing our emotions doesn't make them disappear. It's like sweeping dirt under the rug. It's still there, just hidden from view. And eventually, it's going to create a much bigger mess.
So, how do we become more self-aware? How do we stop running on autopilot and actually start paying attention to our emotions?
Mindfulness is a really powerful tool for this. It's all about paying attention to our thoughts, feelings, and bodily sensations in the present moment, without judgment.
So, it's kind of like what we do in meditation.
Yes, exactly. But mindfulness isn't just about sitting on a cushion and chanting Om. It's about bringing that same quality of awareness to our everyday lives.
So, like noticing the taste of your food, or the feeling of the sun on your skin, or the sound of your breath.
Exactly. The key is to simply observe those sensations without getting caught up in our usual mental chatter. Just notice them and let them be.
I can see how that could help us become more aware of our emotions too. Instead of getting swept away by them, we can start to notice them as they arise.
Exactly. And it takes practice, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But the more we practice mindfulness, the more familiar we become with our own unique emotional landscape. And that familiarity gives us a greater sense of control.
So instead of just reacting impulsively, we can pause, take a breath, and choose a more skillful response.
That's the goal. Another helpful strategy is to identify our emotional triggers, those situations, or people that tend to push our buttons.
Ooh, yeah, I definitely have a few of those. Like, when my boss starts micromanaging me, my anxiety levels go through the roof.
Once we're aware of our triggers, we can start developing strategies for managing them.
Like maybe finding a new boss? Just kidding. But seriously, what kind of strategies are we talking about?
Well, sometimes avoiding the trigger altogether is a good option, if that's possible. But often, it's about finding ways to reframe the situation, shifting our perspective so it doesn't feel so threatening.
So, like, instead of seeing my boss's micromanaging as a personal attack, I could try to see it as his way of, I don't know, trying to ensure the project is successful.
Exactly. And it's not always easy to change our perspective, especially when we're in the thick of it. But with practice, it gets easier to catch ourselves before we spiral into negativity.
That makes sense. It's like we're training our brains to see things in a new light.
Precisely. And another essential skill for managing our emotions is self-soothing.
So, like, giving ourselves a pep talk in the mirror.
Well, pep talks can be helpful, but self-soothing is more about finding healthy ways to calm ourselves down when we're feeling overwhelmed.
Like taking a long bath, listening to music, or going for a walk in nature.
Those are all great examples. We all have different ways of self-soothing. The key is to find what works for you and make it a regular part of your routine.
So once we've got a better understanding of our own emotions and how to manage them, what's next?
Then we can start working on the other domains of emotional intelligence, like empathy, self-motivation, and handling relationships.
Okay, let's dive into those. Starting with empathy. We talked about it earlier, but I think it's such a crucial skill it deserves a little more attention.
I agree. Empathy is that ability to understand and share the feelings of others. It's about stepping into their shoes and seeing the world from their perspective.
It sounds simple enough, but in practice, it can be really hard to truly empathize with someone, especially if they're going through something you've never experienced yourself.
That's true. But Goleman emphasizes that empathy isn't just about being nice or polite. It's about making that conscious effort to understand the other person's emotional experience.
So it's not just saying, oh, I'm so sorry you're going through this. It's more about really trying to grasp what they're feeling and why.
Exactly. And he offers a few strategies for actually cultivating empathy. One is to simply listen attentively to what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally.
So paying attention to their tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, all of that.
Right. All those cues provide us with so much information about what the other person is experiencing. It's also helpful to ask open-ended questions to encourage them to really share their feelings.
So instead of asking, are you okay? Which might just get you a simple yes or no, you could ask, how are you feeling? Or what's going on for you right now?
Exactly. Those kinds of questions really invite a deeper level of sharing and understanding.
And what about those times when you're really struggling to understand someone's perspective? Like, what if their experience is so different from your own that you can't even imagine what it's like to be in their shoes?
That's when it's crucial to acknowledge your own limitations and approach the conversation with humility. You can say something like, I can't pretend to understand what you're going through, but I want to try to learn more.
I like that. It's honest and respectful. And it also highlights the importance of being non-judgmental.
Absolutely. Even if you don't agree with the other person's perspective, you can still strive to understand where they're coming from.
And validate their feelings, even if you wouldn't necessarily feel the same way in their situation.
Exactly. Validating someone's feelings doesn't mean you condone their behavior. It simply means you acknowledge that their feelings are real and valid to them.
I think this can be really challenging, especially when we're dealing with someone whose views are very different from our own. But Goleman's point is that empathy is like a muscle that gets stronger the more you use it.
Absolutely. The more we practice empathy, the more rewarding and fulfilling our relationships become. It's really the glue that holds relationships together.
All right, let's shift gears and talk about self-motivation. What does Goleman have to say about using our emotions to achieve our goals?
He points to a few key characteristics of individuals who are really self-motivated. One is optimism, that belief that you can actually overcome challenges and achieve your desired outcomes.
So optimists tend to see setbacks as temporary bumps in the road or even opportunities for growth.
Exactly. They don't dwell on failures. They learn from them and keep moving forward.
They also tend to have a lot of self-control, right? Like the ability to delay gratification and resist those impulsive urges that can really derail our goals.
You got it. Self-control is absolutely essential for achieving those long-term goals.
I mean, think about things like sticking to a diet or saving for retirement or finishing a challenging project. It takes a ton of self-control to stay focused and resist all those temptations that pop up along the way.
Absolutely. And self-motivated people are also good at setting realistic goals and then breaking those goals down into smaller, more manageable steps.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed by the big picture, they just focus on taking one step at a time. Makes sense.
Right. And they're persistent. They don't give up easily, even when they encounter obstacles.
They've got that grit that allows them to keep pushing forward even when it's tough. And they probably celebrate those small wins along the way too, right?
Yeah.
It's got to help with motivation.
You bet. Recognizing and celebrating your accomplishments, no matter how small, really reinforces that positive cycle and keeps you going.
Okay, so we've talked about self-awareness, empathy, and self-motivation. What about that last domain of emotional intelligence, handling relationships? What insights does Goleman offer for building and maintaining healthy connections with others?
He emphasizes the importance of communication, being able to express your thoughts and feelings clearly and assertively.
Assertive communication, not aggressive communication. There's a big difference there.
Exactly. It's about standing up for yourself while still respecting the other person's perspective. It's finding that balance between being passive and being aggressive.
I think a lot of people struggle with that. It can be tricky to know how to be assertive without coming across as pushy or disrespectful.
Oh, it definitely takes practice, but it's such a valuable skill to develop because it allows you to communicate your needs effectively and ultimately build stronger, healthier relationships.
So what other skills are important for, well, handling relationships?
Conflict resolution is a big one. I mean, let's face it, it's inevitable that we're going to have disagreements with others. So it's important to be able to address those conflicts constructively.
Goleman talks about techniques like active listening, empathy, and compromise. It's about finding solutions that work for everyone involved, not just trying to win the argument.
Right. And it also helps to remember that conflict isn't always a bad thing. It can actually be an opportunity to deepen understanding and actually strengthen the relationship.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I'll admit I tend to avoid conflict like the plague, but maybe I need to reframe my thinking on that.
It's definitely worth considering. And the last skill Goleman highlights for handling relationships is collaboration.
So being able to work effectively with others toward a common goal.
Exactly. This involves being able to listen to different perspectives, value the contributions of others, and find ways to leverage everyone's strengths.
Yeah, collaborative people are really good at building consensus, fostering teamwork, and creating a more positive and supportive work environment.
They understand that we can achieve so much more when we work together than when we try to do everything alone.
Okay, so we've covered all 5 domains of emotional intelligence: self-awareness, managing emotions, self-motivation, empathy, and handling relationships. Phew, that's a lot to take in.
It is a lot. But I think the main takeaway is that emotional intelligence isn't some abstract theoretical concept. It's a set of practical skills that we can all learn and apply to improve our lives and our relationships.
And the good news is, We're not stuck with the emotional intelligence we were born with. We can always choose to grow and evolve.
It really is empowering, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're not just like puppets controlled by our emotions. We have the power to shape them.
It's a whole new way of looking at things. So, as we wrap up our deep dive here, any final thoughts you want to leave our listeners with?
Just a reminder that emotional intelligence isn't about becoming some kind of like emotionless robot.
Right. It's not about suppressing your feelings altogether.
Exactly. It's about developing that self-awareness so you can make conscious choices about how you respond to situations and how you interact with the people around you.
Well said. We've covered so much in this deep dive: the power of reframing, the importance of self-care, the magic of exercise for your mood, and of course, how empathy can transform your relationships and even help you navigate those tricky conflicts.
And that idea that emotional intelligence isn't some fixed trait. It's a set of skills that you can actually develop and strengthen over time. It's like working a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
And the best part is, you don't need any fancy equipment or expensive training programs. You can start practicing emotional intelligence right now in your everyday life. Just start paying attention.
Absolutely. Pay attention to your emotions. Try practicing mindfulness. Challenge those negative thoughts when they pop up. Listen attentively to others. Really listen and try to step into their shoes and see things from their perspective.
Those are such great starting points. And remember, progress, not perfection, is the goal here. You don't have to master emotional intelligence overnight.
Nope. Just focus on making small, consistent improvements over time. And be patient with yourself. Developing emotional intelligence is a lifelong journey, not a destination.
This has been so insightful. It's incredible how much of success in life really boils down to not just like raw brain power, but how we manage the human side of things.
I agree. Goleman's book really drives that point home. Emotions matter.
They really do. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of emotional intelligence. We hope you learned some valuable insights that you can take with you and apply to your own life.
Absolutely. And remember, your emotions are powerful tools. Learn to use them wisely, and you'll be amazed at what you can achieve.